Hello and welcome. Today on What It's Like, we're going to tell a story. A lot of different people like Rob Pitts Used Cars. They all tell stories and stuff. I love Rob Pitts. He's a great guy. I've never personally met him, but maybe this year we could set something up or something. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, we're going to tell a story. And this story takes place in 2013, which is almost 10 years ago. It's hard to believe that. That much time has passed. Anyway, this story happened at the Vintage Grand Prix. And if you don't know what that is, it is literally the biggest car show that happens around here. They get between 2,500 and 3,000 cars. It's absolutely insane. Everything is split up. Like all the Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Maseratis, McLarens, they're all up on top of a hill. Lancia, they're all up on top of this hill. And then you have the Ford guys, the Chevy guys, and they had Datsuns and Volkswagens. Volkswagens their its own section. The Porsches in their own section. Mercedes-Benz, BMW. It's absolutely incredible. And if you've never been there and you're in the Pittsburgh area, what are you doing? Go! It's the biggest car show. It's great. It's a great experience. It's a great time. Anyway, I have to stop there and go back 3 more years to where the story actually takes place. In 2010, I was 21 years old, and up until that point, I've owned luxury cars. I had a 1989 Grand Marquis, and then I had an 88 Lincoln Town Car. They were both maroon. The Lincoln Town Car is probably one of my top 5 cars that I've ever owned. It's one of the best riding cars ever. I've owned 30 cars since then. And I've never had a car that rode like that. It's like riding on air in your living room. It's amazing. But that's what we're here to talk about today. 2010, I was 21, and I wanted something a little different. Like I wanted kind of a muscle car, but I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted. It was between 3 cars. It was between a Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, which I did end up getting eventually, but that's another story for another time. A Datsun 240, 260, or 280Z. It didn't really matter to me. 240s were great, but they were starting to get kind of expensive. They're really expensive now. You can still kind of get a 260 or a 280 for relatively cheap, but their prices have definitely jumped up since then. Or a 1965 through 1968 Ford Mustang. So I started looking. Facebook wasn't as big as it is now. So if you wanted to find a car for cheap, the only place that you could really look was eBay or Craigslist. So I started looking on Craigslist, and I found a 1967 Mustang with a 351 Windsor FMX 3-speed. FMX was the heavy-duty transmission 3-speed automatic, so you didn't have to shift it, but you could shift it if you wanted to. The 351 Windsor never was in the Mustang, so this was not a numbers matching car, and it didn't really matter to me. I paid $5,000 for that car. V8 had a 351 Windsor with modifications. It shook the ground you were standing on. That car was awesome. I didn't even make it home. It overheated. That was the biggest issue with that car. I had heating issues with it. It would overheat no matter what I did. It was running flat top pistons and a radical cam. And so I bought that car to establish credit. I didn't have any credit to my name. My mom co-signed for it. I paid it off in a year. And then I went back to the bank and asked for more money, and they said sure. So then I took that money and I got it restored. Fast forward to 2013, we were going to go to the Vintage Grand Prix, me and Trevor. And Trevor's grandpa has a huge car collection. The guy's a huge car enthusiast. We're going to go over there in the springtime and do some really cool stuff. And you'll meet Trevor definitely. He'll be on the program eventually. He's a great guy. But he could have chose, at that point in time, Trevor's grandpa had a 58 Morgan. He had a Porsche 356 he was working on. It wasn't quite done yet. Mercedes SL. Not the new one, it was one from the 70s. Then he had a couple Alfa Romeos and a couple other cars like that. But Trevor ended up taking, he had a 1980, I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but it was a Porsche 930. Now it was nicknamed the Widowmaker because it had a whole lot of power. And when you got on it, the ass end squatted down. And so that's the car he decided to take. And we were going to go to the Vintage Grand Prix. It was 2013 was the year of the Mustang. There was probably 500 Mustangs there. It was insane. But Trevor's like, you better have AAA on speed dial, because he knew that I had overheating issues. I think I put a different radiator. I ended up putting like 3 radiators in this Mustang. Like, I started with a 2-core radiator, and it was good for maybe 15 miles, and then you'd have to pull over because it would just get too hot. And then I put a 3-core radiator in it, and then I could go 30 miles, and then still same thing. So I bought the biggest 4-core aluminum radiator that I could find, and I put it in there, and then I was running it without a thermostat, and then it didn't get hot enough to operate, so we had to put a thermostat in there. Long story short, that solved my heating problems. I didn't have any more heating issues after I put the big 4-core aluminum radiator in it. So we're going to the Vintage Grand Prix. I met him in Cranberry Township, which I live about 45 miles north of Pittsburgh. This show, it's really hard to get to the actual show because they shut down all the roads around Schenley Park. Schenley Park is where this show is. They shut down all the roads around Schenley Park, and they have vintage races. Like, they race different class cars. Like, they'll race Porsches, they'll race Lotuses, they'll race whatever different classes around Schenley Park. It's an epic weekend. Saturday, Sunday. It's generally in July, like mid-July. It's usually July 13th, 14th, somewhere around in there. So me and Trevor were driving down. We have to drive through Pittsburgh. We have to drive through Oakland. And it was great. I wish I had some of the footage of me and him driving, because they're 2 totally different cars. 67 Mustang. My Mustang was red. It had black interior. His Porsche was red, and it had like tan interior. But aside from the color, that was literally the only thing that was about the same. Was one where they were both red. And it was an awesome experience. And we get there. It's 90 degrees today on this particular day. And a lot of people don't realize that in Pennsylvania it gets humid too. Not as humid as, like, say, Florida, but so we get to the Vintage Grand Prix. Trevor's in front of me, and he started having issues. Like, something happened to his Porsche. It got so hot that it actually overheated the starter box. And before we left, his grandpa was very adamant, and he said, if anything happens to this car, it was a really high dollar car. He said, if anything happens to this car, it's a $10,000 bill to fix it. Don't hurt my baby, is what he said right before we left. So Trevor goes down into the Porsche section and parks his car. I go over to the Mustang section, which was up on a hill. There's lots of hills around this place. And we just walk around the show, and he tells me he's having problems. And I said, well, we'll let it cool down, and when we leave, I'm sure it'll be fine. So we walk around. We spend about a couple hours there. I go to get in my car, and I drive down to where he's at, and he can't get it started. And so I'm kind of laughing because, he's like, have AAA on speed dial, because your car's not going to make it, because it's a Ford and it's a piece of junk, whereas my German engineered Porsche is going to be great and it's not going to have any issues. And he's having issues and mine's running fine. But so he goes around to he worked at Porsche, so he knows that, like, some of these new Porsches, they come with jumper cables. Nobody from Porsche wanted to help him. And there's different stereotypes with different cars, and Porsche people are kind of like, upper lip kind of thing, look down upon people, you know. And that's not what it's about. If somebody's having a problem, you should do everything you can to help them. Anyway, they didn't help us, but we went over to the Packard tent. Packard people, Studebaker and Packard people, and like, I'm not saying that everybody's a jerk in the automotive world. A lot of people that have older cars will be more than keen to help. But the Packard people, they're like the best people. They're so nice. And they came over, they tried to jump it, and it wouldn't jump, it wouldn't start. So we had to push the Porsche out of the show across the street. And I told Trevor, I was like, man, it's a great thing I got AAA on speed dial, because you know, I'm like, hey Trevor, is that your car? Did it start? Oh no, wait, it didn't, because it's on the back of that truck. It was great. I had to take his people home in the back of my Mustang, and he drove back with the tow truck driver, and he's sweating bullets because his grandpa's like, you know, it's $10,000 to fix this car no matter what happens to it. So he gets back to his grandpa's house, and his grandpa's standing there in his garage with a machete in his hand saying, "What'd you do to my baby?" And then he's like, no, I knew it was gonna break. It was already a part starting to fail. But I hope you liked that story. It was a great story. If you like this, put it down in the comment section below. I got a couple other car stories that are pretty cool that I'm more than happy to share with you guys. But I ended up selling that car, and I got married, and it wiped out all my debt. But the moral of the story really is if you like a particular car, don't let anybody tell you that, you know, you can't affording it's one thing, but there's still 67, 66, 68 Mustangs out there for $5,000. You just gotta look and be patient. But the flip side of that is you also have to be very careful when you're buying it at that price to make sure the floorboards are in good shape. When we got into restoring mine, the A-pillars were pretty rotted. You couldn't tell it underneath the paint and the trim and stuff, but when they started getting into it, Mustangs are pretty cool, pretty safe bet, because they made a lot of them parts. You could get every single part you want for that car. They make new fenders, they make new doors. The fenders that were on the car, I actually had them replaced because they had so much Bondo in them. The car had a lot of Bondo in it when I bought it. And my brother backed into it with his Mustang and crinked, it messed up the door, so I just bought a new door. I mean, and the parts are really relatively cheap. The fastbacks are getting kind of hard to find, and they're getting kind of expensive. But you can still get a coupe. Like I was looking yesterday to just see what's out there. They're getting harder to find at $5,000, but it's still possible. They're still out there. And you know, if you want a cool car, 67, it doesn't really get much cooler than 67 Mustang. You could say 67 Camaro or 67 Firebird, but those are, they're really, you can't find one for $5,000. I'd venture to say if you did find a 67 Camaro for $5,000, it'd probably be a basket case. Yeah. So till next time, toodaloo!